Hi everybody, welcome to Metadata Myths and Madness. It's time to learn and perhaps unlearn a little too about what you know about metadata. My name is David Diamond. I will be hosting today's webinar. I'm the Director of Global Marketing for DAM vendor Picturepark. I'm also the author of the DAM Survival Guide, which you can learn more about at damsurvivalguide.com. I've been in this industry for more than 12 years now, so I've seen a lot of changes and done a lot of stuff here. With us today is the man whose last name nobody dares pronounce, but I will try. John Hradecky, Principal DAM Education, Adjunct Professor for Digital Asset Management at San Jose State University, DAM designer for several Fortune 500 companies, including Tyco, Roche, etc., and board member and metadata editor of the Journal of Digital Media Management. John, welcome.
Thank you. Good day to you, David.
Thanks very much. So tell us a little bit about your background and what did I not capture on this screen here?
Well, what are those unique qualities? What is the metadata about John Hradecky? That's a good question to start off. Metadata, Canadian, how's that? Location, Vancouver. Age, let's skip that one. Interesting stuff. I came into the digital asset management space, the profession, the practice, through a Master's of Library and Information Science degree. So I've come through DAM as an information specialist, someone who studied digital asset management for their thesis, and I started my career out at Electronic Arts doing their digital asset management system, and I've had the wonderful opportunity to increase my experience with DAM by teaching at San Jose State and teaching in the program for Masters of Library and Information students. So these are graduate students who are looking to expand their knowledge of what it is to be an information specialist in this modern digital world. So
okay.
Again, with 10 plus years, I believe I've got some DAM chops behind me, and as what we're going to talk about today, I think metadata is, or metadata, that's a controversy right there. This is a subject that's near and dear to me, and I know it's very near and dear to many people who are in DAM, who are looking for DAM, and it is a subject that people want to learn more about. So I'm very happy to be here to do this webinar today with you, and I'm excited to see some of the questions coming up from the participants. So don't hold back. Let's get some good questions going. Okay, good. On that note, we will move on to the agenda. We've got 4 sections in today's webinar: making metadata sense, the standards debate, which I know is something that's going to be popular with a lot of people, metadata design tips, and human versus machine, with a little bit of discussion about automation and metadata. The image here shows your control panel that should be on your screen. The only thing you need to concern yourself with right now is the questions box. You can type your question into the area shown and click send. You can do this at any point during the webinar, but we will reserve the last section of the webinar for Q&A so that we can address all that stuff. So whenever you have a question, go ahead and type it in there and we will get to it at the end. All right, let's move into it. First, we're going to clarify some terms just so that we make sure we're all on the same page here. When we speak about metadata, we're talking about words and non-language indications that describe the content of the file and the file itself. Okay. Descriptive metadata, something is green, large, it's the best, it's ready, it's all these different adjectives for descriptive. Structural metadata, we're talking about file formats, we're talking about the size of a file, the location of a file, all of that mundane stuff. When we talk about administrative metadata, we're talking about license, we're talking about digital rights management, and we're talking about contact information in addition to some other stuff that we will get into. When we talk about metadata standards, we're talking about an agreed upon specification that helps ensure metadata can be used and interpreted in a consistent manner. And why is this important? Because, as an example, the model field that you see on a form, should I put a camera model in there or should I put the name of a supermodel in there? So a metadata standard in part describes semantically the purpose for a particular value of metadata so that people can understand this. This becomes particularly important when we're talking about multilingual issues, where one word translated literally to another language might be very, very different in meaning than it was intended to be. Also, when you are exchanging metadata,
you need to know what to expect and where to find it. So if somebody is going to send you metadata and you're going to work with that metadata, you might misinterpret their caption for their notes or vice versa, and it's important. The standard helps keep those channels consistent there. And for people that are entering metadata, they might need to know what all is required. So you might, for example, have 100 metadata fields in your catalog, but then you know that you're going to send that to another, or the file to another place that uses the XYZ standard, and therefore 25 of those fields must be filled in. When we talk about metadata automation, we're talking about autonomous business rules that create or edit metadata using template-based, calculated, or hardwired values. So, for example, if you're applying a copyright and digital rights management based on ownership, you want to let somebody know when a license is about to expire. You want to hold the release until an embargo has passed, which is popular for press releases or ads or that sort of thing. And you might want to automatically create derivatives based on metadata values. For example, if something is approved for use on the website and it's a gigantic Photoshop file, you click a button and then automation kicks into gear and creates a derivative that's ready for the website for that. All right. Does that make sense to you, John, all that stuff?
I think that is a good way to set the foundation for this discussion. Absolutely.
Okay, good. Then let's move into the meat of this. The first thing, well, let me say for the audience that's out there, John has no idea what questions are about to be posed to him. So this is not in any way scripted. So all of this information is going to be new to John based on some of our preliminary interviews and that sort of thing. So keep that in mind while we're going through the rest of the presentation. When we're talking about metadata, when I was thinking about the things that are important about metadata, the first thing that came to mind was consistency. So I'm going to turn this to John and ask, what do we do, or how do we make sure that metadata editors all think the same when you're looking for people to enter metadata consistently, John? What do we do?
That's a good question. I guess the first question or response to that question is, who are those metadata editors? Do we know who they are? Are they all, as I'm looking at question number 3 there, are they internal? Do we give external controls to those people? I think the best way to sort of frame the answer to that one is to say, how do we make sure our metadata editors all think the same? Is what's the knowledge base that they're going from? Are these people subject matter experts within the organization? Do they have controlled list of vocabularies that they're able to use to describe the digital assets? And let's be clear here, what we're talking about here are digital assets within a digital asset management system. So, again, for this discussion, we're really focused on a DAM or a MAM perhaps, but how do we make sure they're all thinking the same? One of the introductory sort of things you do when you start developing a metadata model or a schema, the same type of a thing is, what do we do in this company or this organization or this institution? What do we do? Are we making widgets? And what if we are, what is that widget? Are we providing services? And if we do, what are those services? And it's those type of meetings and discussions where you begin to understand what the organization does. And from those discussions, you're able to create and pull out terms and language. And metadata powers all your digital assets, and it's the terms that come up from those meetings that begin to provide that consistency, that horizontal understanding of what it is that we're doing. And that's where we can begin to think the same and sort of understand the same. We're all on the same page. For instance, we make widgets. We make chocolate bars. Okay, well, we understand that. So what type of chocolate bars do we make? And it's these meetings where people begin to see the language flow and come out, and they understand what it is that we're trying to define with those digital assets. That's one way to do that sort of consistency within the organization. So
how do you deal with the irregularities? So if you've got, first of all,
you kick them out of the meeting. They're not allowed to attend that meeting then. No.
What's that?
They're not allowed to attend those meetings. The different thinking people, no.
Right, but okay, but this is a legitimate concern though. So you've got You know, when somebody is thinking in terms of one language or one type of perspective, and somebody else is thinking in a different perspective, then your poor user is left to figure out what people were thinking. So, is there? I mean, what if somebody came to you and said, "How do I make sure that this stuff is consistent?" What would be the one sentence, the one answer you would say? Do this.
Good governance models.
Okay. So basically you're talking about outside the dam, we want to plan for what we're trying to do, and we want to describe what we're trying to do, and we want to develop the controlled vocabularies. And basically this is not about dam, this is about policy planning.
Yeah, I mean, the great thing about language, and let's be honest, we're talking about language here, and to some degree we're talking about control of that language. And the good thing about language is that it does change over time. We need to develop sort of processes that enable users to engage the dam and say, well, you know, I thought we were calling this a box, but it seems that it was described as a carton. Can we change this term? You need to have governance models in place within the organization to review these terms on a regular basis. I do believe something like on a quarterly basis is a good way to proceed, where you can actually review terms and say, does this make sense? Are we still on track? Do our editors understand what we're doing, and do our users understand what we're doing? Are they able to find things? And if they're not, let's review those terms. Let's review the language and see if we can't sort of come to an understanding of perhaps changing them or adding new terms. So again, language is an ongoing process, and metadata management is an ongoing process. It doesn't stop when the dam is pushed. When the green button is pushed for the dam, the job really begins. You have to manage those terms and manage it through good governance models. Okay,
so what about multi-audience stuff? You've got internal sales and external customers, and you're using the same assets and presumably the same database to access these assets. Do you ever advocate to customers that they use different schema for internal audiences versus external, or do you try to get everybody thinking the same way?
And that's a great question, because it depends on the vendor itself. I would encourage all those participants today to go to your vendor and see what can and cannot be done in the sense of what can be seen and not seen for both internal and external users. Sometimes it is easier for the organization to restrict yourselves to perhaps one model, but if the flexibility is there within the DAM vendor itself to provide many models or many schemas, you can open up windows where an external user can come in, see the same asset, but perhaps not see all the fields that may be a part of that due to privacy or due to regulations where they may not be able to see those things. But again, I would go back and push your vendor and see what could technologically, what could we do with this? You know, what options are available for us? And again, it's organization dependent. It really depends on what the organization wants to be able to show or perhaps not show in those situations.
Okay. Let's move on to integrity, because this is another, once you've got consistency going, then you're looking to make sure that the metadata is something that you can actually trust and rely upon. So questions here, what's the best way to know when metadata is accurate? How do you deal with expiring metadata? And then how do you deal with translation and multicultural issues when you know that, for example, when you translate one word from German into English, it's going to have a completely different meaning than it would have to the German-speaking audience. How do you deal with this?
Absolutely. And that's great that you use the term accurate, because one of the fundamental concepts of library and information science is, you know, authenticity. And, you know, for thousands of years, librarians and archivists have been trusted to manage recorded information. And in many ways they do it and with standardized terms and vocabulary. So when you frame the question of what's the best way to know when metadata is accurate, there is a level of trust with the users that they believe, they trust someone behind the scenes has taken the time to create these terms and drop down lists and values that does make sense. And what I tell a lot of my clients, and when I teach and when I speak about metadata, I always say, you know, do you have a librarian on staff? And if you don't, it behooves you to go get one, because you do want someone inside the organization to be able to help structure that information. And in those situations, perhaps librarians are not in existence, there are many good people within an organization who has that knowledge base that can help you with the accuracy of that data. Subject matter experts, people in product development, those long-term veterans who've been there for years. These are all good sources of information that you want to bring in and say, you know, what are we doing here at this organization or this institution? What are we trying to do here? We create widgets. Tell me about that process. So those good sources of information help validate that accuracy.
So would you ever advocate that a customer put into a policy, for example, like recurring spot checks, random records where subject matter experts review things over time to see whether there's a declining quality issue?
Oh, absolutely. And this speaks back to the issue of the governance model, is that you do want those situations where you can review the DAM and the metadata models on a regular basis, where you can pull in those good sources of people and say, how are we doing? We notice that the queries are looking for something, but they can't find it. Is it perhaps we've used the wrong term, or perhaps the term maybe need to change? So again, that goes back to a governance issue.
Okay. All right, let's move on and keep our time schedule here. For usability, is it important to know how users think, or should we just try to cover all the bases? And then how do we know which metadata to make searchable in our DAMs? In other words, we don't necessarily want every field to be generically searchable through a global field search. And the big question, should Google be the goal in terms of usability for digital asset management?
And when you say Google, are you talking about the one box and a white screen that just says, find me this, or tell me more about your Google?
When I'm talking about Google, I'm talking about the fact that it's become a verb.
Oh, it's a verb, it's a noun, it's a product, it's a lifestyle.
Well, but if you think about this, if people say, well, go Google that, it doesn't come with any instructions, and it comes with a gigantic assumption that you know exactly what that means. Is digital asset management behind the curve in that? Should that be our goal? Should we say to damn it?
If most organizations have the funding of what Google has, then perhaps we could have a different discussion. The reality is that user expectations are sometimes off the map, and I think you're very astute there. Is that and I've met with a lot of C-level individuals who have said, "Oh, so this is just going to be like Google. I can type in a word and I'm going to get something." True, if that term, if that asset, if that file has been properly tagged with good metadata. Google has bots and engines that crawl the world looking for things. In an organization, whatever it be, small or large, again, metadata powers those assets. If they're not tagged properly, they're useless. They're not going to be found. And metadata drives search. So let's go and spend that time to take a look at what our assets are and tag them properly with meaningful, valuable metadata.
Okay, but and I don't mean to just be drilling you on this, but how do I know? I mean, I'm putting together a DAM system, and how do I know what is meaningful to my users? I mean, what do I do? Do I interview them, or what do I do?
Absolutely. Again, when we start off with these types of projects, these are those great meetings where you get the right people in the room, lock the door, put some candy on the table, and say, we're not leaving until we figure out what we're doing in this organization. What are our assets? And while that may sound sort of trite and comical, that's very valuable. You need to have those subject matter experts, like I said earlier, people from product development, maybe someone from marketing and sales. You want the right people in the room to start saying, okay, what do we do at this company? If we're making clothes, how do we call these things? Is this a t-shirt? Is this a dress? Whatever the product is, whatever those assets are, you need to start talking about them in such a way that those terms bubble up. And then you take those terms and you review them and you look and see, is this the right thing? Does this get what we're trying to achieve here? And that's where you get that near Google quality for your DAM.
Okay. All right, that's fair enough. Let's talk about the standards debate now. The purpose of standards. First of all, why should I even consider a standard? And if I do, how do I know which one is right for me? And if one standard doesn't fit, what do I do?
Well, you know what they say about standards. The good thing about standards is there are so many standards. And I do believe in standards. I think beyond the fact that I come from the library and archival background, standards are a good thing. But the issue is with standards is, where do you start? And just as metadata may be somewhat scary for people who are being introduced to it, such as things like thesaurus, and that weird scary word of ontology would always freaks people out, standards does make people a little bit nervous because they don't know where to start. The good thing is that bringing in some good standards to show them a framework of where they could begin is a good place. And for myself, I'm a big fan of the Dublin Core. I like to show people that and sort of say, as a starting ground, let's take a look at how they've developed their fields, what the descriptions are. I think there's some great ones out there, IPTC, Prism, PV Core. There are lots of places to start looking at to give you that sort of framework. The thing with standards, though, is that sometimes in digital asset management, people are not in an industry where there may be standards. So if you're outside of the book industry, which uses Onyx, or you're outside of media, which uses PV Core, and you're selling widgets, they're like, well, what standard do I need? And again, there may not be a quote-unquote standard for them. However, but again, go back and start looking at the Dublin Core and IPTC and all these other formats and see what makes sense for you and your organization. What do these field values and these titles, do they look good to you? Can this be used with you and your organization? And I think that's the best place to start off with these, with the standards for them.
Okay, but so I'm going to throw this back at you now. I have no idea. I look at these standards, and this is dry reading. These are not interesting to read through. I'm not sure what they're talking about. And then I find that as much research as I do, there's a bunch of other standards that I didn't even know about. I mean, really, step by step, what do I do to figure out which standard works for me?
Yeah, and that, well, obviously you've never worked with me that often because I make metadata fun, I can tell you that much. I have several exercises that helps people engage with their products to help them to make it fun because, again, metadata is all about language, and it should be fun because these people live and breathe these products every day. They know these things. So when you start talking about them, people do loosen up and they understand more and more. When standards comes in, it does get a little scary because there are so many, and sometimes, to be quite honest, a lot of the damn vendors don't know a lot of the standards themselves. So, a client may say, "I've heard of this thing called IPTC. I think we can exchange data that way with some of our external clients. Is this true?" And I've seen some vendors go, "Let me get back to you on that," because they don't know the standards themselves because there are so many. And again, they don't need to be seen as scary. They just need to be seen as a framework of where you can start, a framework where you can begin to have a discussion of, okay, well, let's take some of those elements from the Dublin Core, let's look at Prism, let's look at MPEG 7 and say, okay, well, for our organization, I think we can use these, and then we'll know what's best for me, because each organization is going to be fundamentally different, and they can borrow from these and find something that works for them.
Okay, let's flip it.
Don't you want?
Why not standard?
Let's flip it, sure.
Why not? What's the harm? I mean, why wouldn't everybody want to do this? Is there some type of workflow or organization that would just be hindered by using a standard?
Well, I mean, that's great because what it does is it gives you unstructured information. And could you imagine that Google experience or walking into the library and going, oh, when I was here last week, I know that the German cookbooks were under this section. You walk in and go, whoa, how come this is now biology? It's unstructured. It's that sort of classification has been gone. What's the harm of not standardizing? The lack of control of language and the lack of classification and structure to your assets would be removed. And it would be a free-for-all. It would literally be a white screen with a box, and you're going to hopefully roll the dice and you think you're going to find something, and that's a dangerous place to be. You do want to find these things. Metadata powers these assets. You want to find them within 1 or 2 clicks. So there is harm for not standardizing per se. Does that mean you have to adhere to everything that Onyx has or something like Prism? It depends on your organization. I see a lot of metadata stress. I see a lot of standard stress from people who think they have to. But again, if you're not in an organization that has to sort of adhere to those standards, it's okay. It's okay to not get everything down. And it's good to borrow from all the other ones. So yeah, there is some danger in not standardizing.
Okay. Now I know the next one we've talked about the what do I use if I have no idea what I'm doing.
Right.
Where can people go to learn more about what's available? And if they're not using a standard now and they think, okay, maybe I should be doing this, how would you recommend that they squeeze their unstructured data into a standard?
I always recommend to people at that sort of beginning level is go take a look at the Dublin Core. Again, well researched, well documented, well thought out, regular updates to the model. That's a very good starting place for a lot of people who are unfamiliar with metadata and standards. It's a great place to start because it gives them the framework. It's very similar to what you would see in a library, and most of us, I would say 99% of us, have been in a library before, so we have that understanding. And the Dublin Core, I think, is a place I always send people to first to say, go take a look at what they're doing, see how they're structuring the information, and then that gives you a good framework to start asking bigger questions like, oh, okay, well, why do I need to have a date field? Oh, you're right. Oh, we should think about the date the asset was created, the date the asset was published. Oh, how perhaps a date when the asset could be removed from the dam. So I always send people to Dublin Core first. Where can they get more information about standards? I have a page off my website, dameducation.com, that has a listing of my sort of favorite standards and specifications. Even a good Wikipedia search on metadata gives you a great listing of a lot of the metadata standards out there. So the information is there. Again, what someone needs to help out at the beginning of this process with the organization to hold their hand. And a lot of the times, some people they start their dam without having this information with them. So I want to encourage all those people listening today to, once you're finished with this session today, go email your vendor and say, hey, how much information do you have? Can you tell me more? It's good to drive them that way.
Okay. All right. We're gonna shift gears into metadata design tips. We're halfway till the top of the hour, and we got a lot more to cover. So we're gonna power through these things. Starting out, how much and what kind? How do I know how much metadata I should be using, and what types of metadata are most useful, and what do I do if I'm using too much metadata now? How do I pare down?
That's great, because that's one of the first things people always sort of say is how much do I use? It's like asking, well, do I have one piece of cake with ice cream on top, or do I skip the cake and go for pie and something else? How much should you be using? What I like to tell people is, can you try and get your metadata model, these fields, these values, can you try and get it around what I call the silver 25? Can you get it around to that type of thing? Ultimately, it depends upon the asset itself and what you need to describe. I've seen metadata models of 75 fields, which may seem like a lot, but they need to have those fields to describe those assets for regulatory concerns. What I like to sort of remind people, though, is that for every field you have, that does cost money. Someone at some point is going to have to enter the asset into the DAM, the digital asset management system, and for every field you have to fill it out. Whether it's a drop-down or not, it does add time. So while you think, oh great, we've got 68 fields, we've captured everything, I would push back and say, do you need those 68 fields? Let's review them. Maybe you can consolidate some of those into maybe 30 or 40 fields. And I think that's a good exercise for everyone to do, is to always go back on a regular basis and see, okay, I'm hearing from content creators that it's taking too long to enter assets into the system, and we've got 60 fields. Let's review those fields. Do we need them? Can we consolidate some of these? Maybe some of them don't make sense anymore. And for some of them, maybe they're automated. When you, at the beginning of the presentation, when you showed those sort of technical fields like file size and length of the video, those things can be captured automatically, and a lot of information from the assets could be done perhaps in bulk processing, where you can capture a lot of information at once and put it in. But so there are different ways to get around that whole how much we should be using. Again, my recommendation: let's see if we can get around the 25 mark. That's from my experience and seeing how people do it. That's a good number.
Okay. All right. Restrictions versus freedom. Are mandatory fields a good thing? Are free-form text fields good or bad? And then how granular should I get with regard to edit restrictions on individual metadata fields?
Oh, I'm a big believer in mandatory fields, because, again, this is your one time. This is that opportunity where you have to take those assets and put them into the system so they can be found again and reused. That's the whole point of digital asset management, right?
Yeah, but okay. But let me challenge you on this for a second, though. So
let's go.
So on the one hand, we've got the model where fields are mandatory, and on the other hand, and I'm promising you this because I see this all the time. People enter in erroneous metadata just because they don't know the real values, and the system says you can't go to lunch unless you give me a value in this field. Then the record gets saved, and then we have no idea what's right and wrong because good metadata looks a lot like bad metadata. So is it good to really force people to do that, or is it better to maybe flag the record, have the user say, I admit this metadata is incomplete, I'm flagging this record for further review later, and I'm saving it? What do you think?
Absolutely. If there's and that's great you point out that good metadata or bad metadata may look like good metadata, because at the surface level it very well may look the same. How to get around that? Again, I do believe in mandatory fields because some information needs to be there. And with the drop downs, it makes it easier, or radio buttons, it can make it easier for that person to enter that asset. If they don't know, absolutely flag it. I tell all my clients, if there is any situation where that content creator, those people who are ingesting the assets just don't know, and you do need to finish it by 12 o'clock because you have other things to do, flag it. Email the digital asset manager, whoever's in charge of the dam, and say, I just don't know. It's better to do that than put it in and just walk away, because again, that bad metadata will stay with that asset and have a life of its own. So absolutely flag. And in these situations, this is where I'm a big proponent of having people be a part of the process. So a librarian or a digital asset manager, whoever is there to help administer this dam, can review the fields on a regular basis and review some of the work and go, that doesn't look right. Let's talk to these people and see if this was good or not. And if some of the fields are being flagged, and the dam system itself is able to allow that flagging technology, and again, this is something you can ask your vendor, what a great opportunity to sort of spot those potential errors and go back and say, I can help you with this, I can help you fill out that data field.
So what about the free-form fields? I once heard somebody describe he said, if you need a notes field, it's because your metadata schema does not accurately define or reflect the information you need to collect. I thought that was really interesting. What do you think?
That's great. I mean, anyone who's ever studied Flickr, the photo service, Flickr is all about, it's that thing, quote-unquote, folk sorting, where you can add anything. And everything is being part, and they're added to the cloud, of the tag cloud of all these words that are describing things. Is the availability of those fields to give that power to people? I would think that's a great thing. How much do we leverage of that? That's something that needs to be considered. Notes are sometimes that I don't know what else to say, so I'm going to put it in here. Is that value added? Perhaps. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it is literally, I don't know what to say here. I don't think it behooves organizations to make notes required or a mandatory field. I think it's good to have notes as an optional field. If somebody wants to add that last minute, this PDF was great, this PowerPoint slide deck was well received by our clients, something like that, that's a good thing to add into the notes field, absolutely. But I don't think I would make notes a required field. That can help in the situation.
Okay, and then what about individual field permissions? Is it good to restrict to individual people, or do you just basically, is that just going overboard?
Sometimes it's good to go overboard, though. Again, if this is something that your DAM system can do, and again, I'll repeat myself, go ask your DAM vendors what can and cannot be done with these fields. Yeah, why not? If for some of these content creators, let's say you have external people loading assets into your DAM, it'd be good to restrict some of the fields for them for sure. They should only be allowed to enter a few fields, whether the title of the asset, perhaps date fields, things like that. But don't open up the whole store to them, because they may do some things you may not want them to do. So absolutely, restrictions do work, absolutely.
Okay. So the life cycle of metadata, how do you deal with metadata that you know will expire? How do you deal with metadata that becomes obsolete for reasons that you could never have imagined would happen? And then how do you know when you've got obsolete data? What practices do you put in place?
Yeah, this speaks again to what I was referring to earlier on in this webinar. Is the governance model? What's the best way to deal with metadata that I know will expire or even it may become obsolete? It's that regular check-in. It's that process that you've created within the organization to review the DAM. What search terms are being used? Are the queries being received and with assets that they're looking for? If not, we may have a potential problem. So metadata it's a living thing. It's wonderful. It's language. We're trying to control that language, but you need to understand how to manage that metadata. And that governance model, whether it's a core team of people from various departments within the organization, such as product development, sales and marketing, maybe legal counsel, have them regularly look at these things and see how are we doing. Whether that be from the thumbnail, does that look good, to, oh, so now we're, due to regulatory concerns or other things, we're now calling these things a different thing. Let's change that. Let's make sure that the system is able to take that change and then move forward. I mean, again, when the dam is put on and that green light is pushed and everyone goes, hooray, and there's that sort of sigh of, oh, it's done, it's not done. That's when everything truly begins and the work starts there. You really have to regularly watch what your assets are doing, how they're being searched, are they being discovered, and metadata, as I said earlier, they power the whole thing. So let's go watch that metadata.
Okay, let's move on because we got.
It's not an easy. It's not an easy process. It does take work, and I always remind people that you have to watch this. This is not something you go, oh, it's okay. We'll figure this out. You do have to drive your users and say, and your organization, and say, this is important. We have to watch metadata.
Okay, let's move on so we can get through all this stuff.
Sure.
We have several metadata editors. Each have their own areas of expertise, so subject matter experts here. How do you coordinate to make sure that everything that's necessary gets entered, assuming that, for example, 3 or 4 editors will have to go through a single record before it's complete? And then how do you go about designing a multi-language workflow, which is another multi-step thing? Is there any, how do you coordinate that kind of a workflow?
Yeah, that's good, because sometimes the world is not as linear as we thought, and it's not necessarily sometimes where one person, whether he or she may be the content creator who gets to ingest the asset and do all the work themselves. Sometimes it is a pass, it's the baton pass, it's I'll do this part and you do that part.
But how do you, how does metadata editor B know when editor A is finished? Is this, do you put metadata fields in that reassign the record to somebody, or do you send email, or what do you recommend?
Again, it's whatever works best for that organization. Sometimes it's a trigger. Sometimes, again, this is a question for you all to sort of ask your DAM vendors. If triggers can be set out, so I get a notification saying, Mark has finished his work, now it's my job to go and either review and or add more metadata. That's a great way to do it. Some of the DAM vendors are better at sending those notifications than others. Again, it behooves you all today to go ask your DAM vendor, how can we do this in a better way? Obviously, a manual process of emails off the side may not work very well, but triggers and notifications is the best way to sort of spur us on to continue to do our work.
Okay. Let's move on to digital rights management. Is DRM something we can do with metadata? And what sorts of fields would you use for DRM? And how do you ensure the integrity of the directives that you've put in?
All good questions. And I think the whole subject of digital rights management is like a whole webinar in itself. It's so important now, as all our assets are pretty much born digital as they are. We need to understand what they are, where they can be used, and how do we manage those things. So definitely, if there's licenses that you can link to that sort of explain what you can and cannot do with those assets, perhaps copyright concerns, notifications within the metadata fields that sort of say this is to be used, this graphic is for web only, this is not to be used in print production. There are many good fields you can create within that that sort of licensing information where you can add value, because digital assets do change over time, and we need to be able to ensure that the copyright thing is up to date. The licensing concerns, if there are any, are up to date, and I always encourage all my clients to get to become good friends with legal counsel within your organization, because legal counsel will be able to help review those field structures and ensure the language is correct, and we're linking to the correct license and expiration dates. And it's good to have that legal presence sort of help review these fields with you. I am a big proponent of getting encouraging legal counsel to participate.
Okay. Is there a metadata store? Where does all this stuff come from? Where do people get the best metadata? And how, any tips for increasing enthusiasm so that others will contribute? And then how do you deal with, this is my favorite one, the wannabe contributors who really offer no value?
That's good. And those people exist, and we appreciate them by all means, absolutely. How do I make sure I get the best metadata? Again, this is not, I'm a big proponent that slow and steady wins the race. And you do need to take time at the beginning to say, who are those people in our company, in our organization, in our institution, who know our assets well? Again, there are key people you know that product development or sales and marketing, they definitely know. But there's also other people you can find. And it's collectively, when we're in a room talking about workflow and we're talking about our assets, those terms bubble up, and you can see on people's faces when they smile, and there's that agreement of, oh, you're right, that is what we're doing here. We do make chocolate bars, and they are for the North American audience, and we are perhaps English only. We don't go to a global market. Whatever those things are, that's when those terms come up, and you see the enthusiasm from the crowd saying, we're in agreement here. We understand now the data about our data.
Okay, so how do you deal with the people who are not helpful?
You keep them around, because at some point I do believe those who may not be helpful at this point in time may very well be helpful at a future point in time. All good opinion is there. It's just the ability of the digital asset manager or whoever's helping coordinate this metadata exercise to be able to weed out those things and say, oh, that was an interesting opinion or suggestion. Let's evaluate that next time. There's always good ways to sort of continue that enthusiasm, but sort of manage it as well. So,
okay, then let's move on to, this is my favorite part, not just because I love the picture, but automation, human versus machine. Should I spend more time configuring and learn? I should put in there learning as well, or should I spend that time teaching humans to do this stuff? Or are some things too important to be handled by automation? And is it something I should consider at the start, something I should grow into, or something I should avoid entirely? What do you think?
I'm reminded by a very good song, Our Friends Electric by Gary Newman, when I see that robot. Yes and no to all of these things. I think it behooves all of you today who are participating in this to, for those of you who have a dam or looking at a dam, is to go to your vendor and see what are those automated things that could be done. There's a lot of things we think should be done, but let's see what could be done. And then start looking at what we as humans can do. I do believe that technology is a good thing, but as we all know, technology can sometimes be friend and foe. And I think having that human intervention is a good thing. As I said earlier, I tell a lot of people, go get yourself a librarian or an archivist. Go get someone who's going to solely always be looking at information in your organization. That's a good thing to do. And, what's important, bulk things, bulk works well. Overnight bulk processing where you can automatically capture information. A lot of the XML standards, those are good things to be capturing, but at the end of the day, it behooves you to have a human be a part of the process, whether it's to do all the ingesting itself or just to review some of these things. I do believe the power of people is still there, and it's good to have a good handling of what your dam system can do, but to have humans be a part of it, absolutely. I'm a big fan of having people be part of the process.
Okay. So what about...
Robots are sexy, so that's good. Keep them.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So, I'm rushing this because I want to get to these questions that are coming in, so forgive me for this, but
yes.
How do I check to make sure that automation has worked properly, and what type of workflows are most appropriate for automation? And of course, have you ever seen it make a mess of things?
Oh, of course. There's always...
John, I think...
overnight things not going very well. And again, pardon me?
I was saying you're dropping out on the internet connection. I'm wondering if something else is going on your internet line or something that we could stop.
Oh. Can
Can
you hear me well now?
Yeah, I can. Sure.
Okay. I can't remember where I was for the automation thing. What was your last question? Can you repeat it? Sorry.
Just what's on the screen there. How do we know that the automation is working, and that what kinds of workflows should we use it for?
Yeah, best practice that I've always advocated is, even though the bulk overnight load may have gone through, is again, you have your digital asset manager, your librarian, whoever is managing the administrative section of your dam, is take a look at those assets that went in overnight and just do a quick check. Are some of the fields you thought you had populated well, did they go through? Do mistakes happen? All the time. Life is not perfect. We know that. And mistakes do happen and things can get messy, but again, don't put 100% belief that the system will work. Go back and then just make sure that what did happen overnight worked well. Or you're getting assets from an external agency and they're coming into your dam. Just go take the time and evaluate them and see if it did go well. So again, that's a human intervention that I absolutely believe is critical to your success.
Okay. Secret bonus round. These are the nondescript questions for what are the most common or dangerous metadata mistakes people make, real quickly, so we can get to questions.
Oh, interesting. What are the most common mistakes? Well, the good thing is with drop-down menus and radio buttons, a lot of that sort of mistakes can be removed. But where I have seen a lot of mistakes actually is with the bulk overnight things where people just inadvertently do not know and put in the wrong field values. I also see common mistakes where I'm brought in to help fix metadata is where the internal processes of a company did not work well, and the new logo that Creative Services has so lovingly created was not ingested properly, and that new logo wasn't found, and people began to continue to use old assets. So that speaks to a process problem. That speaks to humans saying, okay, we're removing this asset, here's the new one, let's socialize that, let's communicate that. Even though it's sort of outside the dam, that sort of evangelism and socializing of these things is very important. Don't just believe that the technology will do it for you.
Okay, so what about metadata designers? What do they forget to consider most often?
Yeah, I think when you're working with your vendor, it's really good to sort of take a look at the UI of these things. It's sometimes often overlooked, but I think the user experience and the graphical interface that exists, this is something you really need to take some time to and see what works well. Can we switch the boxes around? Could we get a different color here or there? I think that is something that I would sort of say is value added, and I would make the effort to sort of look at that and see what works well. And of course, a rigorous testing and analysis phase where you are trying this out and you're having people go in. Don't forget, this is going to be that system, your centralized system that powers your assets. Don't skip the testing phase. Absolutely. Okay. And then what's the easiest thing I can do to improve the metadata design I've got now? What's my first step? Don't let it get out of control. This, as I said earlier, this is all about control and language. Take the time to review what's going on. Look at the query logs. What are people not finding? Take the time to go and re-interview people within your organization and see what may have been changed, or is there a new product coming. The easiest thing you can do is to keep on talking, to keep the communication lines open, and truly take metadata as that sort of living, breathing thing in your organization that powers your assets, and keep managing it. Don't let it slip out of your fingers. Okay, that sounds good. It's hardly easy, but it's the best thing you can do. Okay, just quickly about Picturepark. Picturepark offers digital asset management for the cloud, on-site, and hybrids. The company was founded in Switzerland in 2000 with offices several places in the world.
And this is Digital Asset Management Innovation, modern design that works with the applications you use. The ones that are listed there are just a few. We've also got SAP and we've got K4, and there's a number of other integrations that have been built based on Picturepark. Museum Plus is actually another new one that was just released recently. Okay, on to the Q&A section here. Let's look at some of the questions that have come in here. Adrian is asking, are there any recommendations for keeping metadata clean on a dam that doesn't support controlled vocabularies?
Oh my, Adrian, who's your vendor? That's a great question. Outside of the dam itself, you can have vocabulary lists, you can have data dictionaries. There are ways to keep the stuff outside and manage the information in there. It behooves you to have these paper documents on the outside of your dam to ensure that the terms are there. And every time you update the dam, you want to take a look at those controlled vocabulary lists or data dictionaries, whatever you've created, and make sure that reflects the changes that are going forward. So again, belief in 100% trust in technology should not always be there, because you can have paper on the backside to help you out.
Okay.
Good question, though.
Yeah, Scott is asking, how many metadata editors do you think is safe? Is it better to limit this activity in the name of consistency?
Oh, good question. And that's so dependent on the organization itself. I mean, some people like Getty Images and Corbis, they employ a voluminous amount of people who are managing content creation and metadata. For the average organization, there may only be a handful of people. Sometimes small is better. That seems odd to say, but sometimes small is good. You do want to have a sort of a core team of people who are managing these things, and sometimes it's just easier to manage that, both in terms of process, but both in terms of the intellectual capital that's being managed there. So I would sort of go towards more of a smaller group that are doing this core consistent activity.
Okay. Here's one. I'm partial to this one from Jerry. In David's book, he categorizes metadata fields as being history, present, future, and file info. Does John disagree with this? Well, John, do you disagree with that?
That's great. I want. Where's Jerry from? Because that's a great. Let's go to the. Let's have a coffee and talk about that one. That's a great question. I do agree a little bit to that. I guess the question to David is, how would you manage that future metadata? Because that's interesting. Have you set up your fields that are extensible and allow for incremental? How I push that question to you, David.
Okay. Well, so here I can sort of describe this. So the concept behind this is that when you think of metadata fields, the values that they contain are either applicable to the origin of the asset, which I consider its history, excuse me, its present state, or the future. So, for example, created by would be a historic metadata field. In progress would be, or approved is a current or a present metadata field, and the rights management approved for or limited to, these are metadata fields to me that deal with the future of the asset. Now the file info, of course, is very separate, and that's all about the box and not about the content. So for me, the model of history, present, and future is valuable not only because it's easy to organize metadata in that level, but I also find that it's more parallel to permissions models, where usually the people who are controlling the historic permissions are not necessarily the same ones, like, for example, people legal that might be working with the future or the digital rights management, and the people who are dealing with the present metadata, which is the current status and workflow conditions, are not usually those same people too. So that's where that model comes from. So we will leave that for people to decide if that works for them.
And what it could very well do is it may very well mirror good business processes that are in existence in the organization, where product development may very well be looking with a tip of the hat to the future. So I do think that's quite an interesting way that you've described that sort of future thinking. So, but good question from Jerry. Love it. Very good.
This one I love from Michelle. If you mix and match standards, then how is that a standard anymore?
Well, that's a standard in itself, is it not? Depends what it's standard capital S or standard small s for your organization. If you don't need to follow the strict regulations, so something like a Prism or an Onyx, whatever you've developed for your organization and what works best for you has in essence become your standard. So whatever you've cobbled together, that verb could be changed by others perhaps, but whatever you've developed, that becomes what you've now said is your standard for your organization. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Again, if you have to follow Onyx, if you have to follow IPTC or MPEG-7 due to the nature of your industry, therefore you should. But if you're not and you're making different products and you have different services, whatever you've created becomes your standard for your organization.
Okay, so you're saying that the importance of a standard is the consistency with your organization, not necessarily an adherence to an industry standard.
Consistency within the organization is so critical. If you are able to develop a model that works and it's got a life and and the traction and the reception has been positive, that is your standard. But it behooves you to manage that standard. Again, it goes back to governance and it goes back to regularly looking at your queries, your query logs, your search files. You have to manage that standard. It's by no means it's just done and it sits there. It's a living, breathing thing within your organization.
Okay. So Andreas,
good question, Michelle.
Yeah, Andreas is asking, why is collecting a lot of metadata a problem if you hide it from users who don't need it?
Good question. Why? I like this. These are good questions that are coming today.
We have nothing but the best guests at Picturepark webinar.
Absolutely. Can you say that question? As I'm looking up into the sky here. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Why is collecting a lot of metadata a problem if you hide it from users who don't need it? In other words,
why are you
not showing it to everybody?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different ways point of views to take a look at that. One is it behooves you to understand your assets in your organization, and to get all that metadata, you need that structure there because it's fundamentally it's giving you the structure to understand what you're doing as a business, whether it's a product or a service, and it behooves you to understand those terms that match the assets and describe those assets. But the hiding it from the users, I'd like to, I guess, I wish Andreas was on the line so we could push more against this because I just want to know more about hiding it from the users. I mean, we as an organization, for whoever you are, needs to understand what you have, and you need that information with you because metadata will power your assets in perpetuity. You need to understand what they are. So I guess I just need to learn more and more about the hidden aspect of it. David, do you have a sense of what maybe that's what he's trying to elicit from that?
Well, if based on my experience with DAM systems, you can, for example, depending on the user's role in the organization, you can present them with layouts of metadata fields that might not include all of the metadata that's in the system. For example, if you are collecting EXIF metadata and you've got a GPS lat long, this is not something that a designer or somebody who's determining digital rights might care about. So you don't present that data to them, you hide that from their view. I think that's probably...
Yeah, and I guess... And some digital asset management systems allow, through roles and responsibilities, you may have a different view or a window into the DAM, and sometimes you don't need to see all that information because of your role, whether you're maybe an approver of an asset, you may not need to see everything there, so it does make sense in those, from an efficiency point of view, just to sort of show people what they need to see and not everything. Because sometimes if you see too much, you may get a little bit apprehensive as to what you're doing. So yeah, sometimes hiding things and just showing them those critical fields is a good thing.
Okay, let's try to. We're running a little over, but I love the Q&A portion, so let's try to keep this going. If you can stick with us. Krister asks, this is a really good one. We speak several languages, but because it's hard to keep things localized, we usually end up using the system in its native language. Is this normal for other companies?
Absolutely. I've worked with many clients, and through reading and through other practice, talking to other people about this sort of localization issue, what I have seen is a lot of people, organizations default to one standard within their organization, and it usually is the business language of that sort of American standard language. So I have seen that more often than not, where people will just say, we know we're global, we know we reach different markets, whether it's Asia Pacific and or the European territory, people sometimes will just say we're going to be English. But there are some great DAM vendors out there who offer multilingual support for certain fields, and if that's something that doesn't exist in your current DAM, I would certainly be phoning my sales rep and or product manager for my DAM system and say, is this something that's in your roadmap for the future? Because if this is something that speaks to you and you need, I would get that on the roadmap as soon as you can.
Okay, then we're going to wrap up with just there are a few comments that came in that are actually not questions, so that these are this one from Casey, which I have to get on there. I agree with David about mandatory fields. I would rather ask a user to honestly flag when a record is incomplete rather than have bad metadata. Bryn, I'm guessing it's pronounced Bryn, is asking or says, I couldn't live without field level permissions now. I think this is the single best way to get clean data. And
good comment. Good comment.
Yeah, and then Terry, this is an appropriate wrap-up. Terry simply says, I have seen automation delete an entire catalog worth of files. So on that note, we are at the end. We've got a bunch of questions here that we have not gotten to. I apologize for that. We will answer those questions, and we will get all of those answers on the Picturepark Google Plus page, Picturepark/Google, and the little plus sign there. And we will also email everybody a link to the recording of this webinar. John, thank you very much for agreeing to participate in this. It's been a lot of fun working with you on this, and it's been great hearing your insights on this. And thank you to everybody who has attended today. Thanks, John.
Thank you, David. This was great fun. Hope everyone got something out of this for metadata for yourselves.
All right. We'll see everybody at the next Picturepark webinar. Thank you.